Statistics and Probability by Ashley Ruth and Shannon Denny.
This is a measurement, like height and weight and volume in area. It measures the likeliness of an event occurring. An event occurring can be classed on a continuum from 0 to 1, 0 being impossible and 1 being likely to occur. It is not a physical measure, but a relative measure, and thus education on probability requires careful and constant development through education. A key idea of chance that students need to develop, as it is the key to many misconceptions, is the idea of chance has no memory. Just because a 6 has already been rolled on a dice does not mean that 6 can't occur again. 6 times, for example. The Chance and Probability strand of the Australian Foundation to 10 curriculum provides a practical framework of experiential learning, in that students are taught foundational concepts of probability that directly relates to life, exploring and interpreting data, and underpinning later development for statistical learning and methods. These methods include a wide range of models for both probability and data.
These misconceptions come from Foundation to Year 10 curriculum. All events are equally likely. Later events may be affected by or compensate for earlier ones. When determining probability from statistical data, sample size is irrelevant. Results of games or skills are unaffected by the nature of the participants. Lucky and unlucky numbers can influence random events. In random events involving selection, results are dependent on numbers rather than ratios. In events are random, then the results of series of independent events are likely. When considering spinners, probability is determined by number of sections rather than size of angles.
The following statements are all false. They are what lead the misconceptions of students in chance and probability activities, which can create errors in student learning. It is important that students have appropriate explanation when performing the following probability activities, as it can lead to gaps in learning and troubles in the future.
Okay, for our first activity, we're focused on Auswell's Level 1 and 2. Auswell's Level 1. Identify outcomes of familiar events involving chance and describe them using everyday language such as will happen, won't happen, or might happen. For Auswell's Level 2, we identify practical activities and everyday events that involve chance. Describe outcomes such as likely or unlikely and identify some events as certain or impossible. For our first activity, we will be choosing to do a whole class focus. For this, we will have a picture of bugs in a jar, as shown here. The teacher will then ask the class as a whole, what is more likely to be picked, bees or ladybugs? As you can see there, you're more likely to pick a bee and less likely to pick a ladybug, as there are 4 bees and only 2 ladybugs. Students will then have to go off on their own and they will receive this activity sheet. Students are first to put their name on the top and look at the big picture up the top here, showing the different types of fish. They then come down and answer the question, where they'll be asked to circle which one they are more likely, less likely, impossible, or most likely, and circle the fish. They'll be able to do this by counting the number of the big fish and seeing whether there is more or less than the other fish. So for the first one, there is more of this fish compared to that. This activity can then be made into a practical by using, for example, fruit, where students would then be asked, is it more likely or less likely to pick up one of these fruits? Today we're using bananas, apples and oranges. If we ask one of the students to pick up one of the 3 at random, we could ask them what is more likely for them to pick. The answer is oranges because there is 5 oranges and there are less of the other fruit. We could then ask them to pick up a pear, and the answer there would be impossible. This activity can also be used as M&Ms in a bag, where students would put their hand in and pull one out at random.
Prior knowledge. It is assumed that students have heard and used in everyday conversation words such as will, won't, might, and have heard and perhaps even used words such as likely, unlikely, certain, and impossible. We are also assuming that they are aware of basic events, such as the sun setting in the afternoon and rising in the morning. It is also assumed that students are capable of counting up to 10 and able to identify different objects and patterns. This is a good activity for students at level 1 and 2 because these activities are visual and practical. It helps them understand, and there are ranges of levels for students that are higher and lower, and group work. For our next activity, we'll be focusing on level 3. Auswahls for level 3. Conduct chance experiments, identify and describe possible outcomes, and recognise variation in results. So for this activity, we're going to be conducting an experiment in which we're going to flip a coin and see whether it lands on heads or tails. Each time it lands on heads or tails, so the first time we flip the coin, we'll then colour in whether it lands on heads or tails. And then the next time we flip it, we'll colour in this section. Once they are finished, they are to fill out what it was more likely to land on. So they have to add up how many that has landed on and what's more likely for it to land on. If they were to flip a coin again, what do they think they would land on and why? This activity could also be used in dice, where they have to roll the dice from 1 to 6 and colour in what the frequency at which it lands on. It can also be used with a spinner, with shapes or colours. Students also have many misconceptions with this. An example of this would be when a student flips a coin and it lands on heads, they would just automatically assume that the next time it will land on tails, as there is a 50-50 chance of it landing on either. This is incorrect, because it may land on heads 3 times and tails only once. This activity is also good because you can extend it or make it easier depending on how high your students are. This activity is hands-on, enjoyable, and involves statistics and collecting data, which can also be made into a graph.
Our last activity will be focusing on Auswahls level 4. Identify everyday events where one cannot happen if the other happens. And Auswahls level 5, recognise the probabilities range from 0 to 1. The activity is called Nearly the 9 o'clock news. Students are given 4 events that might appear on the news, such as a weather report, car thief, a child falling over, and a school tennis competition. Students have to list whether these events are likely to appear on the national news. Then the students get to come up with some other events together as a class and have them listed on the board. Students get a number line where they assign events on the number line that is either likely to happen, which is 1, or unlikely, which is 0. For an event such as the weather appearing on the news, students are more inclined to put it at 1, where it would be likely to happen. Whereas a child falling over at school may be unlikely to happen because it happens every day and is not a news event. So the weather report would happen at 1 because it is likely to occur on the news program every night, whereas a school tennis event would be unlikely because it is unlikely that a school event would occur on a national news. As a class, we would then discuss events that occur throughout the day and whether they would still occur with another event happening first and how certain events affect each other. We would then place these events on a probability timeline on how likely they are to happen each day. For example, is it likely for a student to go to school on a Saturday? Or is it likely for a student to go to school when they have not yet got out of bed? Prior knowledge. For this activity, students should be able to draw and use number lines to represent data and understand what the data is representing. They should be aware of events that are directly affecting their lives and events that affect their town and community. They should also know that there are numbers between 0 and 1 and what order they go in. As these activities are important for students as they can be relevant to everyday situation and learning. In these events can be major in their lives. They enable students to put in order these tasks as either impossible, likely, or unlikely. Students are able to visualise their order